Welcome back to another episode of Easy Garage 360. My name is Josh, and for those that have been watching the series so far, thank you for your support. For anybody that's new, if you could give me a like and subscribe, I would really appreciate it. Today is the day that I'm going to be assembling this engine. It's been a long journey to get to this point, but I'm excited to get this thing together, so let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take off all these main caps. When you're taking off the main caps, make sure that you know where they came from, because front of the block, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, these do come numbered from the factory. They're right here, but you also want to make sure that you know which way is forward, which that's stamped from the factory right here as well. So with taking these off, just make sure to line them up all in order and make sure that this bolt goes here. But for now, I'm going to remove all of them. All right, with these removed, I'm going to go get the bearings and start installing bearings. So the bearings I got for this engine are standard, and from a previous video I measured all the clearances on the crankshaft, and I can use standard bearings with this crankshaft. So with these bearings here, you want to be sure that you grab the ones that have this groove and this hole, because you want oil from these holes in here. Let me see if I can turn this towards you. So if you can see down in here, you have holes right here for oil to get to the crank. And you want to be sure to put these ones in. You don't want to put one of these in, because you won't get oil going to your crank, and that'll cause all kinds of problems. Next thing we're going to do, this piece right here, that's called a tang, and we want to line it up to the grooves that are in the block. There is one that's a little bit different here. You'll notice that the groove doesn't go all the way, and the tang is in a different spot. This front one, the tang is basically matches this one. So be sure that with these 5/4s that this bearing goes in the front. So these right here are called thrust bearings. 2 of them are going to go in the block right down here. What these do is they keep the crankshaft in the correct position, because as you're revving this thing up, what that crankshaft will want to do is either go backwards or forwards. I think it has a tendency to go backwards, but that's the reason they're there. If they weren't, that crank would be riding right up on this block, and it would destroy your crank and your block. So make sure that these are installed. These don't like to stay in here with some kind of help. So I went and grabbed some Permatex Ultra Slick. This is assembly lube, and I'm going to be using this on all the bearings. For these, I like to put a little bit on the inside edge here. Basically as a way to hold this in place as we're installing that crank. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to apply a bead going on every single bearing. And we want a little bit on the outside of the thrust bearings as well. The reason we use assembly lube, it's a little bit thicker than oil, and if you start these things up, they're going to run dry a little bit until that oil pump starts making pressure. The best practice is to disable your ignition system and crank on this thing a little bit to build up some oil pressure and get it to all the bearings. But during that time, this will lube it up enough so it's not running dry. So now that we have our bearings in place, we're going to put it in the crankshaft. I want to be a little bit careful with it because we don't want to mess up our polish. And in this state, try not to spin this because these thrust bearings have a tendency to roll out of position. So once it's in, don't touch it until the main caps are on. And what we're going to do here, we're going to take some assembly lube and put it on all of the main journals. Then with our main caps, we're going to use the solid bearings and match it up tang for tang. And this is our number 1. You can see it right there and forward this way. So this is going to go right here. And I'm just going to put in the bolts finger tight. And same thing goes for the rest of the main caps. For the very back main cap, we are going to install our bearing here. And with this thrust bearing, we want the one that's got the little notch up at the top of it. And you can kind of tell it's going to go on this side because there's a place for that notch to go. It holds it in place. The other side does not have that hole, so this will only fit here. Now that I have the bolts started a little bit, I'm going to use the old trick that I used to use, and I'm going to see if it still works. The goal I'm shooting for is when you tighten these and put in the little bullets with the screws in the side, you want to still be able to turn this crankshaft by hand. Let's see if I can do it. I am going to be starting with this. This doesn't have enough torque to actually fully torque these down. So I'm not worried about over torquing with this. But you want to start by getting these seated first. And then we're going to lightly loosen these. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take these little bullets. I don't know their actual name. They look like bullets, so that's what I call them. These have a hole in them, and the bolts are going to be coming from this way, so we want the hole to go in this way. We are only going to put this in far enough to allow that bolt to go through. If you push it in too far, that bolt will hit up here and it won't let it go through. So I'm going to put it right there. I'm going to start hammering. If it does start to turn on you, you can take a small pry bar and push on one side to get it straightened out. But I'm going to grab a bolt now. And doesn't look like I can go in yet, so I'm going to keep tapping on this thing. All right, there it is. That's all the further you need to go with this. So I'm going to get the rest of these little bullets in, and we'll continue after that. With all the bullets in place and the bolts in place, I'm going to use this again to tighten these down. I'm not going to hammer on it. I just want to get them tight. The size of these bolts right here are a 13 millimeter. The torque specs for this engine are 30 foot-pounds plus an additional 90 degrees. This is my torque wrench here. This one is a click style one. I don't have one of the digital ones that'll beep at you. But when I was taught how to build engines, you want to use a single socket, or at least try to use a single socket if you can, because if you put any extensions on here, it could mess with your actual torque. So I'm going to start here and work my way out. Being that I don't have one of the digital ones that will actually tell you degrees, I'm just going to do it the old school way. And if you think of a protractor back from grade school, it's basically that same concept. I mean, if you start here, you turn it a quarter turn to here, that is a 90-degree angle there. So I'm just going to take a breaker bar and try to get it lined up here and just turn it to this point, and that will be 90 degrees. So I'm going to follow that same pattern. I'm actually going to start from right here. That way I can pull it towards me and I have a little bit more leverage. So being that this angle is here, I want to be right here. I don't want to be exactly in line with this cap. Right about there. With these side bolts here, these are an 11 millimeter. You want to start with 24 foot-pounds and then 90 degrees after that. Moment of truth. Let's see if my old trick still worked, because if you didn't do it this way, from what I found, this thing will actually bind up on you because these things will be kind of wonky and it won't spin. So let's see if it will. Beautiful. Spinning over by hand just the way we want it. All right, let's move on to the pistons. With the pistons, when I put the rods and pistons together, I put them back in the box and I took off one of these flaps to know which way these are actually going to go in the engine. Being that I went through every single one of all the piston rings and measured the end gaps for the cylinder. So these are dedicated to a cylinder now. So front of engine, this is all one side, that's another side. I believe this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So with these bearings, we're going to take a cap off here. And of course you have the tangs right here. Tangs on the other side here. When you take bearings out of the package with 5/4s, it doesn't matter which way or which one goes where. They're all exactly the same. So match up this tang to there. Push it into place. And same thing right here. You do want to keep track of which way these are actually going to go on, but if you keep it with the piston, tang to tang. So this side is going to go right here. So next thing I'll do is I'll take some assembly lube and apply a bead onto the rod and then the cap. And that is ready to be installed in the engine. If I had a work surface, I would set all of these out and line everything up, but I'm using what I have, so I'm just going to set this right here until it's time to install it in the engine. So I'm going to get the rest of these all prepared and we'll go from there. When we install the pistons in this block, there's a couple different tools that we can use to install them. There are tools that are specific to the piston that are all one piece and it just goes over the piston and you just push it right through. That to me doesn't really seem like a good option just because you need one for every single engine because it's specific to that size. So you can use something like this. This is great for beginners and learning how to actually do it. You put the piston inside here, you tighten this up here, and you can release it with this little button here. But this would tighten on the piston rings. You take the butt of a hammer, push it through, and it works. It's fine. It's not my preferred option. Honestly, this is what I used in the military when I first learned how to build engines. And I mean, you look at this thing and it looks like a grenade, honestly. So, fire in the hole. Are we safe? Are we good to come out? I think it was a dud. Okay, should be safe. The next option I'm going to go through with you is the option I prefer. This one I used a lot when I was at engine rebuild shops. The option I prefer is actually a snap-on tool, and it's made by Blue Point. And I can show this to you here. We have a bunch of different bands, and then we have these pliers here. These bands have little pieces that fit on here, and this to me is the best option just because it's so easy to use, and you can use it for any size piston. You do want to be careful with these because if you bend these out too far, you'll start getting these little imperfections in the metal. And if a piston ring ends up right there, it'll bind on the block when you're trying to push it in, and it could break a piston ring. I've actually done it before, and let me tell you, it wasn't fun. So try not to bend these too much if you have to, just because it's been slowly getting smaller after time. You can take this and just lightly bend it out a bit so you can get it over that piston. You don't want to go crazy. So now that I've shown you the tools, let's go get these pistons in this block. When setting up this tool, you'll notice that these pins right here are on one side. They're not centered. So when you go to put in the piston, you want these pins to be closer to the block. So since the release is right here for this tool, I'm going to put it on this side so it's down. And let's go get a piston and put it in. So the basic function of this tool, once you get it on the piston, tighten it up. Before we go to install the pistons, you may want to put a towel on the floor because oil and the assembly lube, it likes to drip. So if you don't want your floor looking bad, put a towel down underneath it. To lubricate these cylinders here, I went and got some 10W40. Just some cheap stuff just to get it wet in here. What I used to use was 50 weight oil. The reason you want a thicker oil here is that way it doesn't drip quite as easily as a thinner weight oil, and it won't leave the piston quite so quickly. So just going to take a little bit of it here. I'm going to use a lid to a spray paint can as a little cup, and I'm just going to pour some in here. Okay. And we just want to take some of this and go around the cylinder. Just like that. Next, I'm going to take the piston, and just to show you here, the way we want to align these piston rings, we want the top one facing the front of the block, so this dot right here. The middle ring, we want the opposite direction. And then for our oil rings, if I can find the gaps here, here's one here. You want the top gap to be right here, and then the bottom one to be right about here. At a 45-degree angle, I would say. The way we're going to want to do this, our mark for forward is this way. So we want to put our tool on over the rings, clamp it down, stick the connecting rod through the hole, and then get the piston down a little bit. And with our hammer, we don't want to use metal against this. I mean, you're talking steel versus aluminum. We don't want to put any dents in this. So we're going to take the butt of our hammer and tap around the edge, get it square, and then a couple taps, and the piston is in. With our piston in, we're going to push it down, and we're going to guide our connecting rod onto this journal. And I'll show you that when we do another piston. With our connecting rod on this journal, we're going to take our rod cap and we're going to put it on here. So tangs, match it up, put it on. I'm going to get these finger tight. I'll do all the torquing afterwards. Now that we have our piston in, this may be a little bit harder to turn over by hand. But it looks like I can still do it. It will get harder with more pistons. So the next piston we're going to put in is down here. So right here, we want this journal away from the piston. We don't want it like this one. Just like before, grab your oil. Grab your piston. Make sure that the mark is going towards the front of the engine. Top ring to the mark. Middle ring on the opposite side. Top oil ring right here. And bottom oil ring, if I can find it. There it is. All right. This does get difficult to do sometimes, just because of how small these are. Okay, gaps are there. Okay. So, top ring this way, middle ring on the opposite side, top oil ring here, bottom oil ring here. So, that's good. Take our tool, put it over the piston, clamp it down, connecting rod through the hole, piston down, tap on the edges of the tool, and push the piston through. Just like that. To show you what's happening under here, we have our connecting rod right up here. You can see that. Going to push the piston down by hand. Reach my hand up there and guide the connecting rod over that journal. With our connecting rod on the journal, match up tang to tang. And again, I'm just going to finger tight until they're all on. Now that we have 2 cylinders complete, I'm going to do the rest of them. When this starts becoming hard to turn, I like using this socket here. This is basically a socket that would fit on a 350 Chevy. Goes right over the crankshaft, and the keyway goes right there. This works on a 5.4. So, put it right over the crankshaft here. Put a ratchet on it. Now I can turn it, even though it's getting harder. So, I'm going to finish up the rest of these and probably speed it up for you. The torque spec for these rod bolts is 32 foot-pounds, and then after that I have to add 105 degrees onto it. I'm going to start with my torque wrench and go to 32 foot-pounds. The size of these bolts is an 11 millimeter. Now that we have these torqued down, I will say this is not the best way to go about doing this with angles. The best way is to go and get a torque wrench that has the capability for the angles. But if you're in a pinch, you could do it this way. The shop that I was working at, they would torque these to 40 foot-pounds and call it good, and we never saw any problems. Again, not the best way to do it. But for my purposes, and being that I'm probably going to keep this, it's fine for what I'm going to use it for. Here we have the rear main seal cover, and here's the rear main seal. On a previous video, I talked about this spring right here that applies pressure on the crankshaft. Sometimes when you install these, because as you're hammering this in, this spring could pop out of here and then you have to put it back in. To keep it in place, I like to use a little Sil Glide. It says brake lubricant, but when it first came out, it was meant for any seal. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to just squeeze a little bit in this seal. So as you can see right there, that's going to block it from coming out. I'm just going to put one on the other side. And now that I have that, that spring should not come out. So I'm going to take the seal, put it in there like that. And the easiest way to do this, block of wood and a hammer. So just put it on here, and you're going to want to try to hit it square in the center, and you just start hammering. Lift it up, check where you are, readjust, and hammer again. This is what it's going to look like when it's completely in. You just keep driving it until it's flat on the surface here. And as you can see, the spring has stayed in place. Now to install this, you see this groove right here going all the way around. We're going to take some Permatex or RTV and put it in there and put it on the block, and that will act as a place for that RTV to go and harden up. This right here came with this seal, so this is what I'm going to use. What I used to use in the past is the Permatex black stuff, but for this should be fine. And put a nice liberal coating on, going all the way around. Okay. All right, let's go put this on the engine. What I'm going to do here is take a little bit of our oil and put it around the edge of this crank. Now I'm going to slide this in here. Try not to get the RTV everywhere. We're going to fit it right over the crank. There are some pins back here to align this, so you want to be sure to get those lined up as well. There we go. We'll take our bolts, there's going to be 6 of them, and put it around. They're all 8 millimeters. Being that it's on the engine stand, some of these may be a little bit difficult to get to. I'm going to take my gear wrench, since it has a ratcheting box end, so I can fit it into all these areas. These last 2, I'm just going to use a socket and a ratchet. Here's our oil pump, brand new. You can see in here, it's got some keys. We're going to try to fit it on this crankshaft, try to line it up, and that'll make it easier getting on. Okay. There it is. Here's our bolts right here. So there's going to be a longer one. This is a dual purpose bolt. It's going to be for a tensioner. I don't remember exactly which one it is. I believe it's this one right here. I could be wrong, but I can always change it when I do the timing on this engine. These bolts are 8 millimeter, so I'm just going to use my ratchet for this. You could use a tool to put it down, but I kind of like feeling what kind of torque I'm putting on these bolts. Okay, this one's loose, but that's okay. And that's the install of the oil pump. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to put the O-rings on this water outlet. Ford sells these O-rings from the dealership for about 13 bucks a piece, which is insane. But I picked up this bag here. It's old enough that the writing is no longer visible. But this bag was a bag of 100 for 20 bucks from Grainger. I don't remember the part number on it, but I'll do some looking, and if I find it, I'll post it in the description below. With these O-rings, I mean, just slip it over top. I usually like to get the first one in, and then you can roll the other one over the first one, and that's all you have to do. That is now ready for the water tube that runs through the valley. The next step, install the dowel pins in the deck of the block. It's going to go here and here. Just take that and hammer it into place. The other side of the block needs dowels as well, so don't forget those. I hope you enjoyed this one. I sure did. I love assembling these short blocks. Someone requested that they wanted to hear this thing run when it was finished. The build is going to continue on this engine. I need to figure out some details first, but I'll make it happen. So until then, I look forward to seeing you on the next one.